After the Cowboys got embarrassed by the Green Bay Packers 48-32, is it fair to assume they're the biggest frauds in the NFL playoffs this year? Or could we consider the Rams or the Dolphins or the Cleveland Browns the biggest frauds so far of NFL wildcard weekend? We'll talk about why I think the Cowboys are the biggest frauds and why those other teams, although they were somewhat fraudulent, are not nearly as bad as the Cowboys are in terms of how these games turned out. Listen, it's Wild Card Weekend. I love Wild Card Weekend. 6 games, a lot of fun. With the added playoff team, usually the 7 seeds don't do all too well, but Green Bay made a fight for that today and became the first 7 seed to ever win a Wild Card Weekend game, which I think makes it more intriguing for the future. Yesterday we had two AFC matchups that I thought went really surprisingly. We had the Houston Texans beating the Cleveland Browns 45-14, and then the Kansas City Chiefs beating the Miami Dolphins 26-7. And I'll start with Houston and Cleveland. I'll go in chronological order here. But I might end with the Packers and the Cowboys. Texans and Browns, there's fairy tale moments in every sport, right? We all want the fairy tale to happen. We all want the guy who's doubted and counted out to be able to make a run. And while it looked like Joe Flacco had the potential to do that, he just didn't have it. And that's really the story. I mean, Houston played very well. CJ Stroud ended the game 16-21 with 274 and 3 touchdowns. Houston's defense was just all over Joe Flacco. And that's what it came down to. He ended the game with, although 307 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, and those 2 interceptions were back-breaking, directly led to Houston taking a very early lead, and they never looked back. Cleveland's defense was never the same on the road as it was at home. And give credit to the Houston fans, that atmosphere was a strong one. And Cleveland came in, although injured, a valiant effort into getting into the playoffs and making a run with the 4th-string quarterback Joe Flacco after Sean Watson got hurt and PJ Walker was ineffective and Dorian Thompson-Robinson was ineffective, and they bring in Joe Flacco and he looked the most effective of the bunch. But like I said, I mean, that it's just, the carriage turning back into the pumpkin in the playoffs against a really good defense in Houston. And shout out to Miko Ryans and the Houston Texans. Every time I see them, it reminds me of what the Jets should have been, right? I'm very similar stories here. Houston Texans this year, Jets 3 years ago. They plucked the defensive coordinator from San Francisco, Rob Saleh or DeMeco Ryans, to be their head coach. They draft a young quarterback. They hire a first-time offensive coordinator. First-time offensive coordinator for the Jets was Mike LaFleur, who is now in LA, Mike LaFleur. And then for the Texans, it's Slowick, who I think is getting some consideration for head coaching jobs if we're being serious. But then both teams take a quarterback 2nd overall. The Jets took Zach Wilson out of BYU. The Houston Texans took CJ Stroud out of Ohio State. And you see the similarities in how they were constructed, and yet the results are so different. Zach Wilson's been awful. The Jets have been awful. And part of that is due to Aaron Rodgers being out, but the Texans aren't going to need to go get an Aaron Rodgers. They're not going to go need to get a 40-year-old quarterback to hopefully save their franchise. The Houston Texans won a playoff game and are hoping for more. And so it really goes down to show, I don't think DeMeco Ryans is head and shoulders proven as a better head coach than Rob Saleh. I don't think the GM of the Texans, I don't know his name off the top of my head, has head and shoulders proven that he is a better GM than Joe Douglas on the whole. I don't think the offensive coordinator for the Texans has proved he's head and shoulders better than the offensive coordinator for the Jets those years. And that's not to say that any of those guys aren't better than the Jets counterparts, because they are. I think all 3 of them are, frankly. But at the end of the day, it really, 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 really helps when you get the quarterback right. And the Texans got the quarterback right. CJ Stroud, just an incredible thrower over the football. And Houston has to be very excited. Maybe not about this year. I don't think they get past next round at the very most. But the fact that they got into the playoffs, they got this experience, they won a playoff game. The next few years are going to be a dangerous time for the playoffs. I wouldn't be surprised if Houston runs through this division next year. Everyone gives Jacksonville the credit, right? Jacksonville blew the division this year. They were supposed to be the runaway favorites in this division, with Houston drafting 2nd overall, Indy drafting 4th overall, and Tennessee, what were they? They were pretty early on too. I didn't necessarily think Jacksonville was that great of a team. I didn't think they'd collapse like they did. And credit to Houston for making a run at it and getting better as the season goes on. And CJ Stroud is going to be a problem for the league for years to come. So the Browns, while they were fraudulent in terms of their success toward the end of the year, I'm not calling them the biggest frauds because at the end of the day, they were playing the fourth string quarterback and there were injuries all up and down the offensive line and defense. And you really saw that impact. I mean, Nick Chubb's obviously out for the year. On top of that, you saw that through and through. Amari Cooper was shaken up in this game too. And sometimes those kind of things hurt your team, big injuries. And so I don't necessarily blame Cleveland. But next year's put up or shut up time for Deshaun Watson. And this storyline could have been a Deshaun Watson revenge game if he was healthy. But when he's healthy, he's not playing well either. So he needs to figure that out for Houston or for Cleveland to have success and to consider him their long-term quarterback. Then the night game, we had the Chiefs beating the Dolphins 26-7. It's tough for me to say the Dolphins are not the biggest frauds of the weekend until the Cowboys put up the performance that they did. And of course, we still have two more games, Pittsburgh and Buffalo and Philly and Tampa Bay, that could prove one of those, teams to be even more fraudulent than the Cowboys or Dolphins. But the Dolphins, boy, did they look bad. I mean, I know it was cold weather, but at the end of the day, I don't buy any Miami Dolphin fan using the excuse of weather when the Dolphin Stadium is purposely built to give worse climate conditions to the opposing team. If you're not familiar, the Dolphins Stadium is built so that in these afternoon games, when they play, the sun comes in the roof directly pointing at the opposing team's sideline. And for that reason, the Dolphins wear their white uniforms at home. Which makes the opponent wear their dark, colored uniforms at home, whether it's red or black or whatever the situation is. And because of that, they absorb more sun in the Miami Heat. They're on the sideline, still getting hit by the sun. They're worn out by the heat, and the Dolphins are much cooler. So because the Dolphins have that every single week at home, and because if this was a home game, I feel like they may have won this game today, this playoff game, I don't buy the excuse of weather. I just don't. I know it was freezing, but Tua looked bad. And I mean, I don't know where you rank him. I'd probably rank him around like 8 to 10 right now in terms of NFL quarterbacks. But they're going to have to pay him a lot of money this offseason. And for him to go out in the playoffs, his first playoff game, and go 20 of 39 for 199 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. You obviously have the injury concerns, but he doesn't really elevate guys around him. And I said this once, and I've said it a couple times now, and I think it's really true. When Tua's throwing to his first option, he's one of the best in the league. And with Mike McDaniel's offense and getting guys like Tyreek Hill open, whether it's short or long, I think Tua's got the arm to hit a deep ball. But guys like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane, these are great weapons for him to throw on the first option. And he's one of the best in the league, if not the best in the league at hitting his first option. Just that perfect, accurate throw. Timing is great, especially with McDaniel's system requiring timing to be so important. But if he's going to his second or third option, or he's trying to make a play where there isn't one, I would say he's below average. I just have no faith in him escaping the pocket and finding someone downfield if it's not scripted. And that's a little terrifying if you're an NFL quarterback. And that's why I can't put him up there at the top of the NFL with guys like Patrick Mahomes, who's elite at that. Guys like Josh Allen, who's elite at that. Guys like Joe Burrow, who's elite at that. Guys like Lamar Jackson, who's elite at that. Guys like a healthy Aaron Rodgers, who's elite at that. I don't think you put Tua in that category. I don't know if you could put him with the Daks of the world, with the Kirk Cousins of the world. I think he might be just right around there, right? With the Jared Goffs of the world. Maybe he's Hawaiian Jared Goff. I don't know. I respect him as a quarterback, and I think the Dolphins' best move is obviously to move forward with him. But to say he wasn't a problem this game and that you don't have concerns paying him huge money in the offseason would be overstating it, or understating it, rather. On the other side, the Chiefs, they looked pedestrian all year, and I think that's what makes this Dolphin loss look worse, is that the Chiefs were not a good team this year. They finished the season 11-6, and their opponent pretty much gave up in the last week. The Chiefs were a team that was turning into a dynasty, and this year they looked absolutely bad. And they got huge impacts from guys like Isaiah Pacheco, ended up with 89 yards and a touchdown, and Rashee Rice with 8 receptions for 130 yards and a touchdown. Made the defenders on the Dolphins, the corners on the Dolphins, look silly. And I'm a fan of Rashee Rice. I'm not a huge fan of Rashee Rice. I think he's a quality starting level wide receiver. The more I think about it, I would feel comfortable if if the Chiefs got 2 wide receivers in the offseason and kept Rice as their third starter. Uh, I think they've moved to the point where they don't trust Kadarius Toney to be one of those guys. Nicole Hardman, he was frustrating to watch yesterday because I felt like he just didn't try to catch up to routes whenever he thought he could get a flag. MVS, Richie James, I think these are all guys that are not that starting caliber wide receiver that Patrick Mahomes needs. And Travis Kelce's taken a step back. The Chiefs need to invest in the wide receiver position in the offseason. That's just plain as day. And that involves their first round pick. Maybe it's a Egbuka out of Ohio State, right? Maybe it's a Brian Thomas out of LSU. I don't know. But they need to get a wide receiver in here to be that number 1 or at least that number 2 for that offense. But Patrick Mahomes did enough for the win. And when he was escaping the pocket and making runs downfield, it was, if I was a fan of the other team, it would have been irritating to watch because I know my Jets have been on the other side of that and having to face that. And he's just so elite at being able to make a play like that. I don't really have a lot to talk about this game. I don't know how far the Chiefs go in the playoffs. It depends on who they're matching up with next round, right? I think they match up decently well against the Bills. Who's their other option? It would be, let's see, if the Chiefs are the 3rd seed, the Bills are the 2nd. So it would either be the Texans or the Bills, depending on who wins. So if the Bills win, if the Bills beat the Steelers, they beat the Bills. And then if the Steelers beat the Bills, then the Steelers will play the 1st seed, Baltimore Ravens, and then Houston will go into Kansas City, which would be a dream for Kansas City, in my opinion. They'd much rather face Houston than Buffalo, than go up to Buffalo. But at the end of the day, the Chiefs did enough to get it done. The Dolphins have some major questions to answer in this offseason, and in a large part, that's the offensive line. And I've done plenty of mock drafts where I have them taking offensive linemen because they need help. They need to give Tua more time. As much as I complain about Tua, and I don't think he's that elite level of quarterback, they need to give Tua more time to be able to go through his reads. Mike McDaniel, I thought, wasn't the best play caller this game, but he was far from the biggest problem. So as much as I would like to consider the Dolphins frauds, they are frauds. As much as I would like to consider them the biggest frauds, we'll talk about the Cowboys in a moment. Lions versus Rams was the sole good game of the weekend so far, of the Saturday and Sunday slate. Matthew Stafford going back to Detroit with the storylines galore. The Detroit Lions end up getting their first playoff win since '91 and their second in like 50 something years. Jared Goff, he looked very, very good. And you know, I'm a guy who thinks your ceiling is not unlimited with Jared Goff, but it's high enough to get to and possibly win a Super Bowl if everything around him is perfect. And tonight he showed that he has the ability to do that. He went 22 of 27 for 277 yards and a touchdown. David Montgomery had a touchdown on the ground. Jahmyr Gibbs had a touchdown on the ground. Amon-Ra St. Brown ended up with 110 yards, and the big back-breaking back-breaking reception to get the last first down and end the game. Josh Reynolds had 80 yards of his own. I thought he looked really, really good tonight. And at the end of the day, LA needs help on defense and on the offensive line. Matthew Stafford got beat up. He still ended up with 367 yards and 2 touchdowns, but he was getting rocked. His hand was messed up. His shoulder was messed up. I thought he might have hit his head a little too hard on the ground to be let back into the game at one point. But he was tough through it. And I think he's right. I don't think he's in the tier with Mahomes and Allen and Burrow anymore, but I think he's right at that next tier of quarterback. And the Rams should do good in surrounding him with better talent. And I don't mean at the receiving position, right? Puka Nacua, 181 yards and a touchdown tonight. Elite. And Cooper Kupp alongside him, elite. I know he didn't have a huge impact tonight. And I know Kyron Williams wasn't really, the factor that they wanted him to be given the situation that happened in the game. But at the end of the day, you need to protect Matthew Stafford more, and you need to stop the other team. It's hard to catch up with the team, and this is true of the Packers-Cowboys game, which I'll talk about in a minute. It's hard to catch up to a team that's multiple scores ahead when your defense can't stop them. And that's what we saw throughout the first half and even more into the second half. I don't want to talk too much about this game. I thought it was a solid game. I thought Detroit was the better team. I thought the Rams, in hindsight's 2020, I guess. So the Rams should have gone for it at 4th and 12, but I thought they were going to, just because I didn't think they felt confident in their defense being able to stop the Lions offense. They didn't go for it. They punted, and that was the last time they had the ball. But once again, props to Matthew Stafford for making the effort. Props to the Detroit fans. It was loud. And props to Mike Tirico and Chris Collinsworth. I don't talk a whole lot about announcers on here, but I like paying attention to announcers and the quality that they do. If a game has great announcers, I'll turn that volume up. If a game has bad announcers, I will mute that game. I'm thinking the Monday Night Crew from last year, if you remember on ESPN, awful. I muted every Monday night game. But the Crew tonight, Mike Tirico, Chris Collinsworth, it's difficult for me to say that's not the best crew in NFL football right now. I'd have to think about it. Jim Nantz and Tony Romo is good. I love Ian Eagle. I mean, he's the voice of my, I almost said New Jersey Nets, Brooklyn Nets. So I gotta show love to him, and I think he's a great play-by-play guy who can really diverse, being able to cross multiple sports. I should say Joe Buck and Troy Aikman are right there. If it's not Mike Tirico and Chris Collinsworth, it's Joe Buck and Troy Aikman. But Mike Tirico and Chris Collinsworth, Chris Collinsworth is a great analyst. He always has been. He's still got the quality that he's had over the years when he worked with Al Michaels, and Al Michaels clearly has taken a step down from where he was in terms of broadcasting quality. But Tirico's an elite play-by-play guy, and I think he's finally getting the respect he deserves. Throughout this game, they were great in terms of normal analysts, right? Normal analyzing of the game. But they knew when to take pauses, and they did a great job in a raucous crowd in Detroit that hadn't seen a playoff game, that hadn't hosted a playoff game in 30 years. They did a great job of letting that crowd breathe and letting that crowd roar really get over the airwaves. And when the Detroit Lions scored that touchdown, the opening drive, they let it breathe. And I think that's so commendable, because a lot of announcers just want to say something. And they did a great job just laying out, letting the moment live. And I just want to commend them for their great talent. Speaking of talent, the Packers and the Cowboys, boy, a lot of talent on Dallas to fall apart. And I'm not a Dallas hater like a lot of people are. I mean, I'm a Jets fan. I don't have a lot of reason to. I don't have a memory of those historic Dallas teams that, were dynastic, that everyone grew to hate. I think Dak Prescott is a very good quarterback. I want to say that. I think he's better than quarterbacks we mentioned, like Tua. I think he's not Stafford. He's not Mahomes. He's not Allen. He's not Burrow, whatever. But I think you could easily win a Super Bowl with Dak Prescott. I think that's very, very possible. And worse quarterbacks have won in the past 10 years. Plenty of them. He finished the game with 41 of 60 for 403 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. And one of those interceptions I didn't think was that bad of a throw. The other one, that was rough. The pick six was rough. But the first one I didn't think was all that bad. At the end of the day, I mentioned it with the Lions and the Rams. Green Bay just shredded the Detroit defense. And I want to give credit to Jordan Love. I didn't think he was elite tonight. I see a lot of takes on Twitter, hot takes. Oh, Jordan Love's going to have a better career than Aaron Rodgers. I think that's such crap, man. It's so frustrating to see everyone just want to get the hot take out there so they were the first to it. You don't believe that. You just don't believe that. I'm sorry. Jordan Love was good tonight. He's very good tonight. Is he a good quarterback? Yes. I think he's a good quarterback. I think he's clearly their franchise quarterback unless something drastic happens. Is he a top 10 quarterback? Maybe. And next year, I think we might be able to confidently say whether he is or not. Is he a top 5 quarterback like Aaron Rodgers was in his prime? No. And granted, he's had 1 year. Like, let the moment breathe a little bit. I just hate that hot take nature of sports fans. It really irritates me. But Jordan Love did good enough tonight. He didn't hit a lot of tight windows. There was a lot of Packers receiver. I mean, Luke Musgrave comes to mind on the right side of the field just being wide open, their tight end. But there was numerous times tonight that receivers were just wide open. Romeo Dobbs left Stephon Gilmore in the dust in the middle of the field and then cut back out to the outside. And on the play to Musgrave, I thought Jordan Love's throw was awful. And granted, there was pressure there coming right at him, right? But it was awful. Luke Musgrave had to stop and come back to the ball. He had a wide open end zone, and he still scored the touchdown. That's how wide open he was. There was no one within 20 yards of him. 20 yards of him. There was no one on his side of the field. I almost said Detroit. Dallas's defense did not show up tonight. And I don't care how good the offense was. Tony Pollard was not great tonight. He hasn't been great the whole season. It was clearly not the move to keep him as your only running back. And I wouldn't be surprised if they go big name hunting in that position. Derrick Henry. But CeeDee Lamb had 110 yards. Michael Gallup had 103 yards. Jake Ferguson had 93 yards at 3 touchdowns. Brandon Cooks had 47 yards. Tony Pollard had 29 yards. Rico Dowdle had 14 yards over the air. Dak Prescott had 45 rushing yards. But at the end of the day, it's hard to catch up when your opponent is putting 7 points on the board every time they have the ball. And that defense did not show up to play today. Romeo Dobbs ended with 151 yards. He was the big threat. He had a touchdown. Musgrave had a touchdown. Wicks had a touchdown. And Aaron Jones, 3 touchdowns on the ground. He looked elite. Just elite against the Dallas defense tonight. And they could not stop him for their lives. And as soon as they did, they left Romeo Dobbs wide open, or they left Luke Musgrave wide open. Dallas has to be embarrassed by that performance. They showed up flat all the way through and through. I don't think Dak Prescott is the problem. I think he wasn't great tonight, but I don't think he's the problem by any means. I would not be surprised if Mike McCarthy's fired in the next 3 days. And knowing Jerry Jones and knowing the type of splash he likes to make and knowing the coaches available and knowing their tendencies, if I had to bet right now in the next Dallas Cowboys head coach, and I already tweeted this out on the Twitter, check it out at LOT Sports Pod, I wouldn't be shocked. I would lean toward the idea that Bill Belichick is going to be the next head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. He's a guy who comes in, gains the respect of the team right away, immediately. And I don't know that that's something Mike McCarthy has ever had. Mike McCarthy turned around this offense. Bill Belichick's going to bring in offensive play callers that's going to make the most out of Dallas's offense. But more importantly, under Bill Belichick, and I'm going to steal this from Devin McCourty, who was one of the broadcasters of the halftime show. Under Bill Belichick, you're never going to have a game versus between the Cowboys and who else in the playoffs where the defense shows up as little as they did tonight. And this is coming from a guy who can't stand Bill Belichick, who grew up in the years of the Jets getting humiliated by Bill Belichick time after time. But I can recognize the fact that Bill Belichick is an incredible head coach in terms of getting guys ready to play, and he gets the most out of every player. And at the end of the day, you can't look at this game where the Cowboys have been 1-3 under Mike McCarthy. Now tonight, losing once again in the first round. And you can't say that Mike McCarthy should be the head coach based on the quality of product that he's put out there in the playoffs, because they've looked awful year after year. And I believe their only playoff win was against was it the Tampa Bay Buccaneers that year with Tom Brady when he won the division in his retirement year? I think that was their only win. I just can't see the team moving forward with Mike McCarthy. I don't think Mike McCarthy's that great of a head coach, if we're being realistic. And I think the fact that the Packers took a clear step up, although they didn't end up winning a Super Bowl with Matt LaFleur rather, as head coach and Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. I think they took a clear step up, especially from an overall preparedness. I mean, we'd see the Packers today just outclassed the Dallas Cowboys. And something about the Packers. I mean, I said Jordan Love didn't have a great day. He had a good day. And I want to say, if I can say anything about the Packers, it's what I said about the Colts a few weeks ago when they got eliminated by the Texans. And I said, no matter who won the game between the Colts and the Texans, the winner was pretty much in the playoffs, right? The loser was going home pretty much. No matter who won the game, the loser should still feel excited about the future because they were a young team, they had a young quarterback, and they were building toward the future. And next year they were going to be just, even better than they were this year. The Packers should feel exactly that. And the Packers coming into this, an incredibly young team, coming into this just hoping to get some playoff experience, and they shock the Dallas Cowboys at AT&T Stadium, where the Cowboys have pretty much never lost over the last few years. Major props to them, major props to Matt LaFleur, and major props to Jordan Love. Even if he didn't make elite throws over and over again tonight, he was absolutely exactly what Green Bay needed tonight. He ended up with 157.2 passer rating, and that's just incredible. And so the Cowboys, we talk about the Dolphins, we talk about the Browns. The Cowboys were the biggest frauds of this week because they came in stealing the division from the Philadelphia Eagles, who have their own problems and I think are going to have some trouble beating the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this week. You think they're one of the best teams in football, right? After getting humbled by San Francisco, they really come back and really made a run at the playoffs, and they end up as the 2 seed to absolutely get embarrassed by the Packers, who now go into San Francisco to face them, the 1 seed who humbled Dallas not too long ago. That's an embarrassing performance by the Cowboys. Anything less than an NFC championship, I would have considered a failure. And even that, I think they might have had to win it to not be considered a failure of a season. This was embarrassing, and this was fraudulent. And the Cowboys need to make major moves this offseason. Maybe it's the head coach. Maybe it's something more than that to really regain that luster. And I think Bill Belichick could be that guy. I think Jerry Jones would give him some conversation and some opinions on player personnel and the cachet of Bill, the ability for them to win 10 plus games, 3 years, and for him to ride off into the sunset as the winningest head coach, I think is a match made in heaven. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think Bill Belichick could be the head coach of the Cowboys? Do you think the Cowboys are the biggest frauds in the playoffs this week? What do you think of the Texans beating the Browns, or the Chiefs beating the Dolphins, or the Rams beating, I'm sorry, the Detroit Lions beating the Rams? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I appreciate you watching this Quick Thoughts episode. I hope you enjoyed. Peace out.